Hello everybody, welcome to Knife Making 101. This is a knife I'm making for my son. This is our little father-son project. He's helped out with me a little bit on it. He's been helping out on it, drilling some holes and making some cuts. Probably going to show him how to use this file before too long here. So this is the Gough Customs file jig. He got the idea from somewhere else, you know. Nothing's new under the sun, but he's got a great video on how to build this file jig. I more or less followed his instructions. Kind of didn't drill as many guide holes as he did, but I find that the guide holes that I use to position my knife are few. I usually end up using, depending on the shape of the knife, I end up using the same guide holes over. I like to have my file over here a little bit further. A lot of people keep their file in the middle here. I like it more of an angled plunge, so I bring the knife over a little bit more from the center line. Basically, before I got started here, I took my knife to the grinder and I used a grinder to take off a whole bunch of steel. I have a center line on here. You can see it pretty well in the video. Actually, I'm pretty impressed, but there's a center line here that I use to tell me how much steel I'm removing from the knife and how I'm progressing towards the edge of the blade. This center line represents where the edge of the blade is going to be at. I took the grinder, took a whole bunch of steel off. I took like 3/4 of the steel off that I need to take off, and I didn't start the grinder back here at the plunge. I started the grinder up here. So there was kind of a preliminary plunge in here that I made with the grinder, and then I used the file. You know, I used a slow and smooth technique with the file, making sure the file was raised up. I used this back corner of the file to grind down the area that I wasn't able to get with the grinder. So I don't have you know, a 1 or a 2-inch belt grinder. I've got a 4-inch grinder, and it doesn't really allow me to get a good plunge line. So I've already done some filing on this, but I just want to show you how I do it. I use the ink. I get some permanent marker ink from the office supply store. You know, you get kind of a heavy duty ink. Some of these inks aren't very heavy duty. This one's pretty heavy duty, and it makes a good coating on the blade. And then I just basically will start slow and smooth with the file motions. Okay, I always start slow and smooth so I can monitor what I'm doing, and then once I feel real comfortable with my filing motions, I'll start to put more weight on the file. And you basically put even amounts of weight on the front end and the rear end of the file. A lot of people will use the hose clamps to attach their file. I just use the electrical tape. You know, as long as the file is along the rod, you're good. So I use the electrical tape, and what it allows me to do is allows me to change the file if I feel the need to change the file. This is a coarse removal file, so it's got cuts going in both directions, and they're rather deep for coarse removal. And you'll find that you want a coarse removal file for this job because it takes time, and the more coarse your removal, the faster you can go. So I start up here where I want my plunge to be. This screw acts as a stop pin, and I start up here where I want my plunge to be, and I raise the file off the knife, and then I just gently start bringing it down on the plunge. And this particular plunge is already created pretty much, and so there's not a lot of material being removed here, but start out there slow and smooth, and then I try and make long strokes to blend it in with the rest of the blade. I spend a lot of my time back here focusing on this plunge. And once I got the plunge created pretty well, then I can move the file over to about here and blend it in with the rest of the bevel. Another thing to keep in mind is that as you're going, you might get to a point where you're not paying attention very well, or you know, you have some bad movements with the file, and it might create some gouges in the bevel. And so after the first gouge, I'd stop, I'd take a breath, you know, I reset myself, reset what I'm doing, start out slow again, and then move on. The problem is if you start grinding in on the bevel somewhere here, if you put too many poor grinds in with the corner of the file on the bevel, then what happens is you're going to get a deep spot, and if you don't have enough steel to remove, that deep spot is going to be really difficult to take out of there, especially when you're approaching your edge line here, your center line. If you put a series of deep grooves in the bevel with the file, if you don't stop yourself soon enough, then it's going to be difficult to take out. So there's kind of a zen to this, just like anything, just like any art. There's a certain level of patience you have to allow yourself, you know, a certain amount of time that you have to allow yourself to do a job like this. It's not necessarily going to be fast. Okay, so my ink is showing me areas where the file hasn't touched that may be a little bit high, and so I'm going to go back and forth here and come back and grind it down until all these areas are gone, and then that'll tell me, that basically gives me a very strong idea of how even this grind is. I really like using the file jig. I'll probably continue to file these bevels with the file jig because it gives me a lot of control and it keeps the grind really nice. You can see with the file, you can see after every stroke what you've done. So if you need to correct yourself, you can correct yourself after the first bad stroke. You can go back and fix whatever areas you may have done a little bit of damage to the bevel. With a belt grinder, it's a little bit harder to see what's going on. You have to turn the blade back and take a look at it and then reset yourself every time. So this allows me to be really consistent. This is the basically the highest, assuming that you all know how this jig works. You can check out Gough Customs video on how to make this jig and how to use it. He's got an excellent video on it. But this is basically the highest setting I have. There's an eye bolt that stabilizes this guide rod, and the eye bolt is turned all the way up. As I go, I'm going to turn that eye bolt down, and it's going to progressively take more and more material off higher up here. And what will happen is as the material comes off the blade at the high point of the bevel, it will slowly come down to meet this center line. So with the first pass, the first setting of the eye bolt, the highest setting of the eye bolt, you want to bring your grinds all the way down just to where it's starting to touch the center line. So I'm gonna finish here probably do this for another 5 or 10 minutes, and I'm gonna be finished. And then what I'll do is I'll turn my eye bolt down, and it'll bring the angle of the file from a steep angle to a more shallow angle, like this, from a steep angle to a shallow angle. And I'll just keep progressing like that, steep angle, shallow angle, until I brought the bevel all the way to the where the design is on this knife. My bevel is going to reach up to about this point here, this corner. It's going to blend in with this design. So on your first passes, you always want to make sure you come as close to this line as possible. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of steel to remove. You're going to be working with the entire flat area of this grind, and it's going to take you a lot more time to remove the steel to get down to the line. So always come down to the line on your first height setting, your first eye bolt height setting. Then what you'll find is you only have really a little bit more steel to remove in this area, the middle areas here, to get you back down to be flush with the edge. So always when I'm working on the plunge area, I go real slow and smooth and light, so that I'm making sure not to dig the file in or make any ridiculous deep gouges in the groove. And then I come out here and I smooth it. I smooth that plunge area into the rest of the knife, just like that. So that's about it, guys and gals. I just wanted to kind of show you what I'm doing here, how I do this, just to help you out with, you know, especially you beginners who want to see more than one example of how this is done, just to help you out here. I still have a little bit of area here where it's uneven. I spent a lot of time carving out the plunge, and so it's low, a little bit low here. I mean, it hasn't touched the line yet or anything, but it's definitely, this is an area right in here where I need to do some blending. So I'll bring it over and just touch it down on the flat. I won't put the I won't actually put the file into the plunge area. I'll put it right next to the plunge area and touch it down on the flat. Okay. Always making sure when you do your plunge to keep the file elevated off the blade a little bit. Okay. If you have the file down like this when you do the plunge, you're going to put a deep groove in the blade there, and it's not going to be pretty. And then taking it to the middle here and smoothing it out. Alright everybody, have fun with your knife making.